You're watching Behind the Headlines. I'm Pacchia. People in the tri-state area are still digging out from under the wreckage caused by Hurricane Sandy. Here to speak with us about some of the insurance issues many business owners are now facing, we have Adam Ziffer, partner at Kasowitz, Benson, Torres, and Friedman. Thanks so much for coming in today. Welcome.
No problem. Thanks.
So, every natural disaster, at least with respect to insurance issues, is different. What, if anything, jumps out at you about this particular tragedy?
Well, two things in particular. Number one, while this was a significant hurricane event, the majority of damage, at least in the tri-state area, is really a flood experience because of the storm surge. There's certainly been a lot of damage and injury resulting from the wind. But the bulk of the economic damage is certainly that we've experienced in Manhattan along the Jersey Shore and otherwise have been driven by flood.
Mm-hmm. And you bring up a crucial distinction there between flood and wind. Can you talk to us about that?
Sure. Well, it comes up in a variety of ways in these insurance policies. Generally, you need special insurance to cover flood. Most private insurance policies don't cover flood damage, but there are ways in which you can procure that coverage either through the federal government's program or through private excess insurance above that program. And policies clearly define the difference between wind-driven damage on the one hand and flood-driven damage on the other. And a lot of these commercial policies will specify that storm surge, that's even if it is wind-driven storm surge, will be deemed a flood. Another way in which this is significant, whether you have coverage or not, there's also the question of the limits that might apply or the deductibles that apply, which relate to how much cash you're going to be able to receive as a result of a claim.
Just from my perspective, as looking at this as a news story, we had some interesting developments. We had disruptions at the port, which really put a crimp on the gas supply in the tri-state area. And of course, power is out for large portions of the region for some time. It's still out for other people. Are these losses going to specifically? Are losses specific to these problems going to be recoverable?
They should be, and really in two different ways. And this is, of course, to the extent people have insurance coverage. There is something, an additional coverage in a lot of property policies called service interruption coverage. Mm-hmm. So you might have a facility. I have a client who I talked to last week who has a printing facility in Jersey City. It suffered no flood damage, no water intrusion at all, but it was down for almost a week because of the interruption of the electric service. They have a coverage in their policy, a grant of coverage for service interruption, which recognizes that if the service interruption resulted from a flood or something else, even though that didn't impact you, you would have coverage for it. The second way in which these types of experiences, the closing of the port, the drying up of the gas supply, might result in covered losses is through what's called contingent business interruption. So you may have a manufacturer overseas or on the West Coast who takes their supplies, some of their raw materials from the ports in New York, and to the extent that their business is reduced as a result of basically a covered peril under that policy, either windstorm or flood, they could recover the value of their lost business because of the contingent interruption of the supply chain.
So we were talking before we hopped on camera. This is a pretty busy time for you in your practice. Can you tell us a little bit about who your clients are and what are you telling them these days?
Well, generally our clients tend to be commercial entities, Fortune 500 companies or otherwise. And what we're hearing from now, a lot of businesses in the tri-state area that have suffered property damage because they have physical facilities in the areas that were impacted by the storm, and they've got significant business interruption or time element harm that they've experienced. And what they want to know primarily are what's going to be covered in terms of my business interruption. But even more significantly in the short term, they want to know, what about all the money that I have to spend now? What about the decontamination costs? What about the cost to get my workers to the job over the first week where public transportation was down? What about the extra food that we've brought in to feed them because all the restaurants in the neighborhood are closed? They want to know if all of these items are covered under most property policies, these are fall under the umbrella of extra expense, and the guidance that I'm giving it away free now. The guidance that we're giving to our policyholders is, number one, get your business back first. That's most important. The things that you need to do to get your business running, you got to focus on that. And then number two, in terms of insurance, so long as what you're doing is necessary to get your business going, and a reasonable thing to do as a guiding principle, it's going to be covered by the extra expense coverage in your policy.
You have this great 35,000 foot perspective on what's happening in terms on, at least in a macroeconomic sense. Any idea what in the aggregate damages are going to look like from Hurricane Sandy?
Well, I've heard projections upwards of $50 billion.
It's an enormous amount of money.
It's unbelievable. Katrina, I think, was an order of magnitude larger, about 140 some odd billion. But I wouldn't be surprised if some of the highest projected estimates increase, because you're still today seeing significant service interruption. You're seeing significant gasoline shortages, which of course could, as you could imagine, lead to other contingent business interruption losses.
Neighborhoods in New York City still don't have power. We're 2 weeks out.
Absolutely. And not only that, there are a lot of buildings downtown, which is downtown Manhattan has a significant number of businesses that are ongoing down there, where their buildings are, they're not condemned, but they're closed for now. And they don't expect these buildings to reopen for 6 months to a year, I'm hearing from some clients, until they can access the space.
And of course, this all is going to put some stress on the National Flood Insurance Program. Any sense as to the way forward here? They're looking at some substantial payouts.
Yeah, as I understand it, the National Flood Insurance Program is authorized to borrow up to about $3 billion to pay claims, and the expectation is that the claims, I've seen between 5 and 10 billion that would fall under policies sold by under the National Insurance Program. I think, and I think we're starting to see this a little bit, notwithstanding the fiscal cliff and all of the economic issues that are surrounding the election that we just had, I think this is an issue where you're going to see all of the legislators line up to really support the increase in support the rebuilding that you're seeing in the area, that funding would necessitate. A question about long-term aspects of the National Flood Insurance Program. I was reading some things where they've got recurrent claimants because they just rebuild the home that are in certain areas that are devastated over and over again. It's a real drain on the program. I think what they need to do is they really need to incorporate and fund state-of-the-art rebuilding that is going to, it may cost more in the short term, but is going to lessen the payout in the long term with recurrent disasters.
Yeah, some people are saying just by the very existence of this program, you're incentivizing bad decisions in terms of what gets rebuilt where. Then again, it's hard to tell a homeowner not to rebuild his or her home.
Well, and that's why
land that's been flooded.
And I think you don't have to tell them not to rebuild it, but what the government should do is fund rebuilding in a technologically sound way that's going to be, if not impervious, at least more resistant to more of the same, considering that a lot of these homes are in areas where it's just going to happen again.
And finally, when we're talking to people, it sounds like there's going to be a fight developing over whether Sandy is a hurricane or a storm for insurance purposes. How do you see that unfolding?
Well, you've got, I think, 7 governors and maybe the mayor of D.C. who have stated unequivocally that they expect that insurers will not apply a hurricane deductible. And this is somewhat grounded in fact because of the level of the winds at the time that the storm made landfall. I know.
Who makes that call?
Well,
I always wondered. Is that the National Weather Service or?
Yeah, I think the National Weather Service does, but ultimately judges are going to do it if the insurance companies resist the tide being put out there by the governors.
All right. Adam Ziffer from Kasowitz. Thank you so much for coming by today.
Thanks for having me.
If you'd like to learn more about the cases and issues we just discussed, be sure to go check out our offerings on BloombergLaw.com and also on the Bloomberg Terminal. You can see more of our videos on YouTube, and you can follow our updates on Twitter. I'm with Pacchia. Thanks for watching.